Well, let's say I need to start tracing this, which I do, because of course at the moment, if I switch off the PDF, there's nothing to see on the tracing paper. So this, just to repeat, is exactly the way that you would work if this were a real drawing board. I like to work with construction lines, so I'm going to go back to get my tape measure tool here. The tape measure tool I'm now going to pull in to define the position of the house and define the position of the house like so. I'm going to give myself a few more construction lines just to help me trace this house. And in fact, a really easy way of doing it is to draw with big rectangles. So I'm going to draw a big rectangle across there. And if we switch off the survey, you can see I've drawn that so far. We can then switch the survey on again, and I can draw another rectangle across this section here and across this section here. And if we switch the survey off, we can see that we've so far drawn that, and that we no longer want these lines here. And so I can erase that and erase that and erase that. Always easier to draw too much and then erase. And it's always easier as well, if something is rectilinear, to draw with rectangles and then erase the lines that you don't need. I simply need to go on doing that until I've traced the outline of the entire property. So I do that by going backwards and forwards between the underlying survey and the tracing paper, checking all the time that I'm tracing correctly. I've drawn a rectangle there. I'm going to draw another rectangle here, then switch off the survey and then delete the lines that you no longer need. That's given that detail on the corner of the house there. I then switch on the survey again and go back to this, noticing that there's a small rectangle here of this inset in the house, and I don't need construction lines for that. I can simply pull that rectangle out across the pink line defining the house and then delete that rectangle and check that I've drawn it correctly. Always a good idea to go backwards and forwards, checking the detail as you go, because things might be missed out or mistakes might be made. Here, I've made a small mistake. What we can do with that is just give a couple of construction lines to that corner and then pull out the rectangle like so and delete what we no longer need, correcting that minor mistake on that corner. So it's always a good idea to check the accuracy of one's drawing before moving on. The next thing I'm going to do is to give this house some definition within SketchUp itself. How do I do that? Well, if we switch off the underlying survey, you can see that I've drawn the outline of the house. I can then get the eraser and erase the construction lines, which are no longer useful to me. What I can then do is give the walls a nominal thickness. Of course, we as garden designers and landscapers are not actually working on the house, but we want to be able to identify the house clearly on our plan. So this wall thickness of 300 is simply nominal using the offset tool here. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm not actually going to put doors and windows in now because that would take too long, but what I'm going to do is just show how I would model the house. We have this as the plan, and what I then need to do is to simply lasso it like so. Now that I've lassoed it, I can go to the Move tool and the plus move to copy it. I can then copy it out. I can then delete the central area, the floor space as it were, because all I want is the walls. And now that I've defined that, I can give that, let's say, a nominal height of, let's say, 10 meters. And I pull it up like so. You'll notice at this point that it's still a transparency. We don't want the transparency, and so in fact at this point it's important to give it some colour. So to do that, of course, all I need to do is to go to Materials, and from Materials I can choose a colour. Back to the library, plus the little dot there. I'll colour it in grey and go to the little paint pot here and then colour the house in like so. And so now that house is grey. I can then pull it up, let's say a nominal height. I'll give it 10 meters of height. 10, 0, 0, 0, enter. And so we have this object defining the position of the house in 3 dimensions. What I then need to do is lasso that house, turn it into a group. Now that it's a group, I can tag it by giving it the name house. Of course, all I need to do there is to write in house and then apply that name to the house so that I can switch it off and switch it on. And then having done that, it will very comfortably move back into the place that it came from, because of course it's a clone of that position. We now have what is starting to emerge as a 3D plan sitting on top of the survey. And all one does is go on doing more of the same, building up your design work with the constant reference of the survey underneath, which you can switch off or switch on, and the objects which start to build up on that survey being controllable through tagging.